Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is New York City and city politics. I've always thought of myself as a savvy New Yorker, in touch with the spirit and the vibe that makes this amazing city tick. I thought I understood the politics and the concerns of my fellow New Yorkers. Then I spent a week as a patient in a New York City hospital, and my eyes opened wide. They say that New York is a cultural melting pot, and it is. And the staff of nurses and PCAs, the patient care aides, and PAs, and housekeeping staff on my floor were a microcosm of that very pot. In the dark of the night, while other patients slept or tried to sleep or struggled through the fogs of anesthesia and medications and everything else, I rested in my hospital bed, strategically located outside the hub of the ward, the nurses' station. I learned so much about what New Yorkers are really thinking by listening. I was privy to all kinds of conversations, including plans for a labor strike that was later aborted. The conversations were held among staff from the United Nations of employees from all over the world. And this is what I heard. About education. One said, "Our kids are not learning in school." Another said, "How can our country survive without education, especially math?" Another said, "We have to fix the failing schools." About borders, one said, "If we had to come legally, why should they just come in?" Another said, "Remember when Biden floated the plan to pay each illegal $100,000? About law and order, one said, "I'm afraid every time I go on the subway." Another said, "I'm afraid every time I go outside on the street." Why are the politicians letting this happen? We need to arrest, prosecute, and convict. About politicians, they said, "They're all crooks." Another said, "Cannot trust any of them." Another, "Trump is a criminal." Another, "Biden has lost his mind. Biden is mentally incapable." Night after night, I was taken aback by what I was hearing. Here I was in New York City, bastion of the Democratic Party, and Democrats and their policies, priorities, and personalities were being bashed with as much vitriol and frustration as were the Republicans. I was astounded. What happened to turn Main Street, New York City around? What happened to do that? What happened to all those who gathered together around AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Everyone was ready to anoint her as the queen of the progressives, as the savior of not only our city, but also of the country. For the past years, there's been an assumption that liberalism was, while not the voice of the majority in the city, very widespread. And while it may have been, it is no more, according to what I see. In New York City today, liberalism is not the loudest voice of people. Not to say that AOC doesn't have a significant following. She does, and in her primary, for her congressional seat, she beat her Democratic opponent, Michelle Caruso Cabrera. While it was not even a close race, AOC spent $10.5 million to Cabrera's $2 million. I have to assume I would be hearing praise for Biden and bashing of Trump. I could not exclusively, but it was split. It was an actual even split. I expected speakers to embrace bail reform. Not at all. If the elections were held in that nurses' station, in that New York City hospital, conservatives would have a very good showing. America is a very large and complicated country, and I understand that. And New York, especially New York City, is the same. Life in New York has changed. And as I heard loud and clear, people are running scared. Scared about their future, scared about the future of their children. So what did I do with all this information I was gleaning from my listening? I certainly did not enter the nighttime conversations. I tucked it away, and I'm sharing it with you now. As usual, I've also been thinking about Russia and about Iran. Iran is providing drones to Russia for use against Ukraine. This is the real stuff, not Hollywood or even Bollywood movie drones. This is the real thing. We have seen the images of the Iranian Shahed 136 drone. The shape of this drone is unmistakable. This Iranian contribution to Putin's invasion has been used as kamikaze missiles, crashing into their targets. and their targets have been almost exclusively civilian areas, children's playgrounds included. In addition to the drones, Iran has also sent staff to train Russians in order to fly the drones. Actually, it's to maneuver the drones. It's important to understand that while Shahed 136 is a drone, these drones function as cruise missiles. Each drone carries an 80-pound explosive head that detonates on impact. The impact causes the explosion, only the impact. While they are small in size, they're launched from the back of a pickup truck. They can launch from anywhere. They have a range of 1,500 miles. These Iranian drones, or UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, are not new to this invasion. They've been used by Russians for several months, but not only in isolated incidents. And only recently have they become a weapon of choice. Two interesting asides here. First, the UAV, the drones, have been renamed. UAV used to stand for unmanned aerial vehicle. Here, now, today, it stands for uncrewed aerial vehicle. The second is the Shahed 136 drone, now being used is very frequently by Russia. The best explanation for this tactical change that Russia simply does not possess the stockpile of missiles and smart bombs that we thought they had. The catch-all term, smart bombs, is cruise missiles. Because Russia does not have their own supply of them, they are buying the drones from Iran. These Iranian drones, while very destructive and certainly lethal, are very rudimentary, controlled by a monitor and a base. They can stay in the area until their targets appear. They can hover. And for that reason, these drones have been called and nicknamed loitering drones. Because of the sanctions leveled against Iran by the West, the drones are using civilian GPS satellite systems and technology is easily available on the open market, on the internet. For all intents and purposes, these drones are similar to very good high school science projects. They use GPS, they get them from AliExpress, and navigation systems from GLONASS. That means that GPS target strategies are actually handled by the handler, who often has to shoot them and arrange them. Iran is not permitted to acquire military-grade navigation technology. So in essence, the operation system of the Shahed 136 is as good as your car's navigation system, or Google Maps or Waze. We all know how good those systems are in getting us to our cousin's wedding or in an area we've never been to before. And here they're being used to wage war. The Shahed 136 drone is about 10 feet long. Its wingspan at its widest, and its very distinctive triangle wing is 8.5 feet wide. The Shahed weighs about 440 pounds. Because of their size, it's hard to shoot them down. And again, because of their size, they became a very effective cruise-like missile. Understandably, Ukraine has broken off all ties with Iran, precisely because Iran is providing weapons to Russia. And those Iranian weapons are targeting and killing and maiming Ukrainian citizens. And because of the wreckage of these drones and the down drones that we've seen, we can clearly identify them as Iranian. Many countries have condemned Iran for their part in the Putin invasion. Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid took it one step further and said that the Russians' relations with Iran pose a significant threat to the entire world. Speaking on Russia's RTV channel, Lapid underscored the role that Iran is now playing in this invasion and said, quote, "We naturally think that relations between Russia and Iran are a serious problem, not only for Israel, but also for Ukraine. Europe and the whole world, Iran is a dangerous terrorist state, and the fact that Russia is doing business with it puts the whole world in danger. The fact that they use Iranian drones to kill Ukrainian civilians is absolutely unacceptable." That's the end of the quote. Lapid explained that Israel continues to support Ukraine in the ongoing conflict with Russia. He also said that Israel has, quote, "a duty to look after its security, after Israel's security." Lapid was apparently referring to Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, announcing that Israel won't provide Ukraine with weapons, just defense systems, not weapons, systems of defense. Israel's promised to provide Ukrainians with early warning systems to help protect civilians, to get them into secure areas and bunkers. But Ukraine is not satisfied. And the Ukrainian official actually responded with a biting metaphor. He said, "That is like asking someone for bread and getting a spoon." What a metaphor. Having Iran, China, and North Korea all together, all helping Russia, is a potential problem for the Western world. Should they continue to unite, the free world will be in jeopardy, especially the United States and Israel. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from the J-Post, from Jerusalem Post. It was published on October 19, 2022. It's entitled, Australia's Flip-Flop Diplomacy on Jerusalem as Israel's Capital. It's an editorial subtitled, The Australians Choose the Russian Model, Not the American One, in its approach to Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Understandably, the Jerusalem Post editorial board, as well as the rest of Israel, was stunned, shocked, and concerned when Australia decided to relocate their embassy from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv. This was what the editorial said. This is how they wrote it. In a clumsy act of weak-kneed diplomacy, Australia on Tuesday announced that it was withdrawing former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's 2018 decision to recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Interestingly, the reaction in Jerusalem when Morrison announced that move 4 years ago was underwhelming. The Prime Minister's office did not immediately issue a statement praising it, and the Foreign Ministry only tepidly welcomed it, saying it was a step in the right direction. Why such a mild response then? Because a year after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, announced it would move its embassy, the Australians acted not with the conviction of the Americans, but rather with the reluctance of the Russians. The Russians, 6 months before the United States announcement, issued a statement saying, "We view West Jerusalem as Israel's capital." This post editorial explains both the irony of this decision by Australia as well as the impact of the decision. The two things are very, very important. It's both ironic and the impact is also very valuable. They tell us that it really puts all of Jerusalem in question, not just East Jerusalem. How ironic it is that the Russians, whose relationship with Israel is now being strained by the war in Ukraine, have not reversed their Jerusalem move, while Australia, considered among Israel's best friends in the world, has done just that. And what have the Australians done by this reversal? They have said that West Jerusalem, which has been the country's capital since 1948, is up for negotiations. In announcing the move, Foreign Minister Penny Wong said, Jerusalem is the final status issue that should be resolved as part of any peace agreement, unquote. Wow. The Jerusalem Post concludes with some important points and lessons. They wrote, for Israel, there are a couple of important takeaways from the whole episode. First, Jerusalem should prepare for the possibility that Australia might recognize the Palestinian state. If this sounds far-fetched, consider the following. 3 years ago, Australian Labor Party called for a walk back of Morrison's Jerusalem decision, as well as for the next Labor government to recognize Palestine as the state. If the party followed through on one of those pledges, why think they may not do the same on the other? Secondly, Canberra flip-flop should lead to a greater appreciation in Jerusalem of U.S. President Joe Biden's decision to not act like the Australians and reverse his predecessor's decision to move the embassy. Even though Biden himself was opposed to the Jerusalem embassy move, Biden did say something that Albanese in Australia was unable to do. Stand up to a minority voice in his own party, pushing an anti-Israel agenda that can only weaken ties with Israel. We have a lot to think about here. Next up is a column from Ynet that presents us with a truly modern-day case of King Solomon. It was published on October 20th, 2022. This column was written by Yoram Yolani. It's entitled Israeli Court Rules for DNA Testing in Modern-Day Judgment of Solomon Case. Subtitled, After Wrong Embryo Implanted in Woman, Potential Biological Parents Fight for Yet Unborn Child as Birth Mother asks to hold on to the baby. Judges say baby must know his or her roots. Experts weigh in on the dilemma. Yolani writes, Judges in the Lod District Court on Thursday ruled that DNA testing must be done to determine the biological connections of a couple to a fetus carried by another woman. The dramatic events began in September. A pregnant woman who had undergone in vitro fertilization at the Asuta Hospital in Rishon LeZion had a DNA test in a different medical center and found she was carrying a fetus unrelated to her biologically. There is definitely a court case here. I'm telling you that right now. But how does one decide? That's the question that Liolani needs to ask. He continues, the legal question soon to be presented to the court would be which couple would have custody of the unborn child if the biological link to the plaintiffs is confirmed. A custody battle will certainly ensue. The plaintiff said that since the early hours and days after birth are critical in forming a bond with the newborn, they must determine their biological link so they can argue for custody immediately at birth. Victoria Gelfand, a lawyer, said that this is one sole solution to the problem, and any ruling will leave one side hurt. If test results are positive, meaning the embryo is not genetically linked to the woman who is carrying the pregnancy to term, it will make her surrogate without her consent. A surrogacy is a process that requires consent, Gelfand said. There is no easy solution here. Liolani concludes by quoting a professor of Jewish law who said, how will they take the baby away from the birthing mother when she protests? He asks. On the other hand, you can't tell the biological mother that the baby is not hers, and she must give it up, he said. This case will force the Israeli justice system to define the concept of parenthood. Lifshitz said, they will have to answering questions like, how is a mother defined? Is the term parent a matter of biology? And what's more important, the biological and genetical link or the physiological parameters? This case shows that parenthood is not simply a biological term. It is also a social that is determined by social values. Professor Lipsitz also said that guiding principle of justice when it comes to family law is to look at our best interest of the child. And the judge in the case has already indicated that he believes that the child has the right and the need to know who the biological parents are. It's a heart-wrenching and simply terrifying decision that needs to be made by the court on this way. Coming up next, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 9 cartoons and memes today. First up, we all struggle with this. The autocorrect on our computers and phones. It's always autocorrecting things. Sometimes the corrections are correct. Other times they're just plain comical, hilariously funny. All of you have seen them. You try to catch them before you hit send. This meme reads, my teacher told me not to worry about spelling because in the future there will be autocorrect for that, and I am eternally grapefruit. Grapefruit. Imagine that. This next one is just a reminder of the importance of practical knowledge. Next one up is a horse-drawn boat that the caption reads, I have seen it all. This is definitely back to the example of Back to the Future. This next meme is for people who love to snack and convince themselves that it's healthy. Like saying that there are eggs in chocolate cake. That's the one you hear all the time. This one says, once you lick the icing off a cupcake, it becomes a muffin, and muffins are healthy. That's funny. This next meme reads, from my vast experience in watching cartoons, that cartoon is very tired. There's nothing more to say about this. Nothing more. It could easily be a cartoon, but it's a meme. This next meme is an example of how men are from Mars and women are from Venus. The pie chart split right down the middle, explaining how men buy shampoo. 50% of the men buying shampoo read the bottle. For 50% of it, it's on sale. So it's easy. Doesn't make any difference what is happening. That's the only reason they buy it. This meme is a picture of a truck backing up straight into cinder blocks. The caption reads, even the barricade knows what's about to happen. You look at the barricades, you could see them smiling or in dread. This next meme pokes fun at how reliant we all are on our GPS systems. A group of explorers are about to hit land, and the caption reads, according to Apple Maps, we have arrived in India. And finally, a headline that reads, voters may care more about the cost of French fries than January 6th panel's compelling evidence. That's almost absolutely correct. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Brazil's incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro, has lost his election to Luiz Inacio Lula, as he's called, da Silva, returning him to office. Da Silva is vocally pro-Palestinian and has fostered ties between Brazil and Iran, while da Silva, who is often just called Lula, was the first Brazilian president to visit Israel in 2010. The trip was fraught with controversy. The visit took place during the 150th anniversary celebration of the Zionist visionary Theodor Herzl's birth, and the Foreign Ministry had decided to add a visit to Herzl's grave to the protocol for all visiting foreign dignitaries. Then, Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, laid a wreath on Herzl's grave weeks before the Silva visits. But the Brazilian president refused to do so. He just refused. And then, because of the breach of protocol, Israel's foreign minister, at the time, Avigdor Lieberman, refused to meet with da Silva. In a countermove, da Silva wore a keffiyeh across his shoulders and went to Ramallah, where he laid a wreath at the tomb of the Palestinian leader and Israel's arch-terrorist nemesis, Yasser Arafat. Later that year, Brazil recognized a Palestinian state, setting the precedent for South Africa to follow. Da Silva continues to support unilateral Palestinian statehood, including Ramallah's bid to become a United Nations member. In June of this year, once again, he wore a keffiyeh at an event and proclaimed that the Palestinians deserve our full attention and solidarity. Israeli-Russian billionaire Yuri Milner, who left Russia in 2014, has announced that he has officially renounced his Russian citizenship. Milner is the founder of internet investment firm DST Global. He made his fortune by betting on Chinese tech companies like e-commerce, the platforms Alibaba and JD.com. In a tweet, Milner wrote, "My family and I left Russia for good in 2014 after the Russian annexation of Crimea. And this summer we officially completed the process of renouncing our Russian citizenship." Yuri Milner is an Israeli, and he is counted amongst Israel's billionaires. But now that he is a persona non grata in Russia, Milner can no longer help his friends still living in Russia with their investments. Following a comprehensive examination that took about 2 years, Israel's military chief of staff, Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi, permanently assigned female tank crews as part of the Border Defense Corps. The official statement reads, "The decision was made in light of professional and operational considerations and in accordance with the needs of the Army and after the female fighters met the predefined criteria." According to the IDF, initial findings led to the decision to test further. The IDF explained that in light of this, it was decided to hold another experiment, which will examine in depth the possibility of integrating tank fighters into the border defense system, according to defined and clear criteria. At the end of further experience and examination of all the professional parameters, it was decided that female fighters in tanks would serve in the border defense system. In his announcement, Kochavi said, and I'm quoting here again, "We are successfully concluding a professional and in-depth process as part of the concept that the Israeli military is opening up more and more combat positions for women. I trust the female tank fighters to carry out the border defense mission professionally and with great success, and they will be a significant part of the military's operational effort." It took time, but it finally happened. In Germany, a politician named Holger Winterstein from the far-right Alternative Party was filmed dancing on top of a Holocaust memorial in Berlin. Winterstein was dancing on the stones that were erected as symbolic gravestones. The story was reported and filmed, broadcast on a couple of media sources, but the incident drew outrage from several sources, but very little attention on the international scene. Israel's ambassador to Germany, Ron Prosser, decried the incident and said that Winterstein, quote, "enjoy your shameful moment of fame, because your name will soon be forgotten. The sanctified souls commemorated at that memorial will never be forgotten. Proser said that the German politician brought shame upon himself and his party. Winterstein's party will take action against him for his behavior, the report said. It was an act of total disregard and immaturity. There's no doubt about it. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I want to take a few minutes to look at the history of Australian Jewry, the Australian Jewish community. Did you know that there are about 100 to 150,000 Jews living in Australia today? That's only 0.5% of the population. That's half of 1%. Half of 1% of Australia is Jewish. Very small. The first Jews to arrive in Australia came with what's known as the First Fleet. In 1788, Australia was initially a British penal colony, and the first group of prisoners, all total, were 15,100 people, and a handful of them were Jewish. In 1845, there were about 800 Jews in the penal colony. The first organization the Jewish community formed was a cemetery in Hever Kadisha. That was in 1817. But to get a sense of what's really happening today, look at this. In Sydney, Australia, the Jews are a very close-knit community. 75% of Jewish children living in Sydney attend Jewish day schools. In Melbourne, also the same. 65% of Jews attending Jewish day schools. They are very impressive statistics, no doubt about it. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.